the test. We have reading, listening, speaking, and writing, right? Reading, listening, speaking, and writing. So we're going to start in the speaking section. And we're going to discuss a little bit about the questions that we have in the speaking. So in the speaking section of the TOEFL test, in the speaking section of the TOEFL test, I was saying we have a total of 4 questions. Okay, each one is different than the other, so we need to see them all separately. Yes, so we have 4 questions in the speaking section. So these are the 4 sections. In the speaking section, I was telling you, you have 4 sections. The first question is the independent question because it doesn't depend on anything. It will be basically about your opinion on something. It will be your ideas. But the interrogative questions, which are the second, the third, and the fourth questions, are the ones where you're going to have to summarize something that they give you. So in questions 2, 3, and 4, you can never give your opinion. Okay, those are the integrated questions. You're basically going to summarize something that they provide to you. Today, we're going to be working on task number 4 of the speaking section, or question number 4. Okay, do you guys have any questions before we start? Okay, so question number 4. In this question, first of all, we're going to call it the lecture question, okay? Because that's basically what you will have to do. You have to listen to a lecture. For this task, this is the format. Basically, this is what you have to do. First, you will have to listen to a university lecture. Can anyone please remind me what a lecture is? What is it? What's a lecture?
A class.
Exactly. So a lecture is a class. So when I say that you have to listen to a university lecture, I don't mean anything but a class. This lecture is usually like approximately 2 minutes long. So it could be 1.5, it could be 2, and it could be 2.5. It depends. Different every time. So you'll have to listen to it. You are allowed to take notes while you're listening. And then you will have a question that is basically going to ask you to summarize what you heard in the lecture. And you will get 20 seconds to prepare your response. So you will have 20 seconds to look at your notes, to think about what you're going to say, to organize your ideas and your thoughts, to practice maybe. And after those 20 seconds are over, you will get 60 seconds or 1 minute to answer the question. That is to speak. Okay? That's the format. Is this clear? Do you guys have any questions about the format of the task? Nice. So now here's the thing. The most important part here, is knowing the structure of the lecture. The good thing about the TOEFL test is that you always know what to expect in terms of format. It's never going to be a surprise what you have in the test. And this is in an exception. So in task number 4, you will already know what to expect. So that means that when you're listening to the lecture, you won't be lost. You will be an active listener who is looking for specific elements in the lecture. You're looking for like completing a chart. You know what to expect, you know what to look for, you know what to pay attention for. So we're going to see what that is. So during the first 30 to 40 seconds of the lecture, you will have a short introduction. So the professor in the introduction, by the way, the person who speaks in the lecture, the person who gives the lecture, we're going to call it the professor because, well, that's how we call teachers, like university teachers, right? The professor. So during this introduction, the first 30 to 40 seconds, the professor is going to talk about the topic of the lecture. So, for example, let's say that this lecture will be about camouflage. Okay, so let's just say that this lecture will be about camouflage, animal camouflage. So that is a topic. In the introduction, you will know what the topic is, and you will probably have a short explanation about that topic. So the professor may give you a definition of what camouflage is, maybe some examples. So you will have that in the introduction. That is the topic and the explanation. Now, I'm going to start by giving you the first tip. When you guys are listening to the introduction, that is the 30 or 41st seconds of the lecture, you should not take any notes. That means that you shouldn't be writing down anything at all, but instead you should be focusing on understanding the topic, okay? During the first 30 to 40 seconds of the lecture, during the introduction, you shouldn't take any notes. Is that okay so far? All right. Now here's the most important part, the body of the lecture. No matter what topic you have, no matter what type of lecture you have, in task number 4, you will always have 2 subtopics. So this topic is going to be broken down or divided into two subtopics. So for example, if we're talking about camouflage, maybe you can have 2 types of camouflage. Maybe you can have 2 definitions of camouflage, or 2 ways in which animals do this, or like there are many possibilities, right? But you will always have 2 of them. So let's say that we have 2 types of camouflage, and the first topic, the first type will be shifting colors. Okay, so that is going to be your first subtopic. So the professor will tell you there are certain animals that have the ability of shifting colors in order to blend in with their environment and with different types of environments, and maybe escape from their predators. So you will have a short definition, a short explanation of what this concept is or what this subtopic is. The professor will explain it for you to understand. So you will have that in the first subtopic, the subtopic, and maybe an explanation of it. And finally, to complete the subtopic, you will get an example. So each subtopic has its own example. So if we're talking about animals that are able to shift colors, maybe we could talk about lizard, maybe one specific type of lizard that's able to do this. So the professor will mention this animal specifically, right? And will be like, so there's this animal called this and this and that lives in this place around this, this part of North America, and that's able to shift colors around their habitat, so they can turn green when they are around leaves, they can turn brown when they are in the soil. So basically, you will have the example there talking specifically about one thing, okay? And same thing goes for the second subtopic. So the professor will move on to another subtopic and be like, so there's another type of camouflage which consists in shifting shapes, maybe. And then you will have another example of an animal that can do that. Okay? And that is the most important part. This is what your focus should be. You should be focusing on finding those 2 subtopics and 2 examples. And of course, you gotta take notes of them. Okay? You may have additional details, but the most important part will always be the 2 subtopics and the 2 examples. Is that okay? Do you guys have any questions so far? No questions? Great. Then please get ready. We're going to start with an example. So I'm going to play the lecture and you guys will take notes. But remember, you just need to take notes on the subtopics and examples. During the first seconds, you just listen. So let's play.
Listen to part of a lecture in a business class.
If a consumer has to choose between 2 products, what determines the choice? Assume that someone, a purchaser, is choosing between 2 products that cost the same, okay? If people have a choice between 2 identically priced products, which one will they choose? They choose the one they think is of higher quality, of course. But what does it mean for a product to be a high-quality product? Well, business analysts usually speak of two major factors of quality. One factor is reliability, and the other is what we call features. So reliability. What's reliability? Well, a product is reliable if it works the way we expect it to work, if it can go a reasonable amount of time without needing repairs. If a product, a car for example, doesn't work the way it should and needs repairs too soon, we say it's unreliable. So product reliability means basically the absence of defects or problems that you weren't expecting. It used to be that when people thought about product quality, they thought mainly about reliability. Today, it's different. People do still care about reliability, don't get me wrong. It's just that manufacturing standards are now so high that, we'll take cars for example, today. Today's cars are very reliable. So reliability is important, but it's not going to be the deciding factor. So if reliability isn't the deciding factor anymore, what is? Features. All those extras, the things a product has that aren't really necessary but that make it easier to use or that make it cool. For example, new cars today are loaded with features like electric windows, sunroofs, air conditioning, stereos, and so forth. When people are comparing products today, they look at features because reliability is pretty much equal across the board. And that's why manufacturers include so many features in their products.
Using points and examples from the lecture, explain the two major factors of product quality and how their role in consumer decision-making has changed.
Okay. That was the lecture. So, all right. So you're probably, you probably took notes. We're gonna talk about them. But before that, remember I told you not to take any notes from the introduction? And that's because later on, when you're speaking, you guys will have to have an introduction yourselves. So you will have to say something regarding what the topic was. You will have to summarize the topic pretty much. Now, the thing is, many students make the mistake of spending too much time doing that summary, spending too much time just trying to explain what this lecture was about. And they run out of time at the end of the day. They don't have enough time for explaining what is the most important part of the lecture, and that's the body. So that's why, as soon as you finish listening to the lecture and you hear the question, you will see it on your screen as well. I want you guys to read the question carefully, and you are gonna extract the topic from the question. So it's always gonna be the same. The question's always the same. It says, using points and examples from the lecture, explain. So whatever comes after the word explain, that is usually the topic. So you can use that, or you can summarize it if you want, but use what you have in the question. So in this case, we're gonna say that the topic is the two major factors of quality, of product quality, and their role in consumer decision making, right? That will be the topic, what we're getting out of the question. I'm gonna write that down. The factors of quality, product quality, and their role in consumer decision making, right? We can. Okay, guys, that is a topic, and I don't want you guys to give it that much thought. Remember, use what you have in the question. I'm going to give you one more tip. When you guys are speaking later, the only things that you will see and the only tools you will have, one is the question. You will have it on your screen while you're speaking. Two, the timer, because they're going to be counting down the time that you have. So you will have a timer there. Three, your notes. And four, your memory, right? Those are the only things that you actually have when you're speaking. So you need to make the best out of each one of the four. You need to use the question for this. You need to use the timer so that you manage your time well. You need to use your notes just as a guide for the structure. And you need to use your memory for your actual response. Okay, so use the question. That is a tip here. Do you guys have any questions so far? Is this okay? Right. So now tell me, please. We already know the topic. This is, sorry, was that a question? So we already know the topic so far. This is about two factors of product quality. Can you guys tell me what the first factor was? The first subtopic.
Reliability.
Exactly, reliability. So the first subtopic, the first factor is reliability. Now the professor defines reliability. So what is it? Can you give me a definition?
Absence of default.
Exactly, but not defaults, right? Absence of defects. Okay, exactly, love that. So I don't know if you guys noticed, but we have many definitions for reliability, right? One of them was the absence of defects in a product, but there were other things as well. I think it was when the product works the way that the consumer expects it to work, right? That was another definition. So as long as you're able to catch one and understand one and explain one, then that's fine. Remember that at the end of the day, you're listening to a 2.5 long lecture, but you will just have 1 minute to explain it. So 2.5 minutes from the lecture, you need to summarize them and compact them into 1 minute. So you're obviously going to have to leave some things behind. So if you got more than one definition for this topic, just use one of them is enough. Okay?
Okay.
Now, what about the example? Sorry?
Just we can use one definition.
Yeah, exactly. You don't need to use all of the definitions that you get. One is enough. Any other question? All right. So that's it. That was the first subtopic. Now, what about the first example? Remember that each subtopic will contain its own example. So what is the example given for the concept of reliability? What does the professor say?
Sorry.
What is the example given for reliability? How does the professor illustrate that concept?
Another example.
I mean, the example that the professor gave, right, for reliability. So what is that? What was that example? That's what I'm asking.
A car.
Exactly. It was a car, right? So what happens with this car?
Yes.
Works good.
Exactly. When you buy a car and it works well, it doesn't need repairs. What else? When it works the way that you would expect it to work, right? You're not constantly taking it to the mechanics. You don't need to fix it soon after buying it. So it works well for a reasonable amount of time, and it doesn't need so many repairs after you buy it. So it's just working, the way that it's supposed to, the way that we would expect it to work. Okay. So yeah, great. That was the example. Now, what about the second subtopic? What was the second factor that influences product quality?
Features.
Features.
Features. Exactly. Great. And what are features?
For the extras that can have the car.
Exactly. The extras that a product has. Anything else?
Some descriptions of the product.
Descriptions, you sure? Or well, they're
Additives.
characters. I'm sorry, David?
Additives. Oh,
Uh, Come again? What was that again? I couldn't hear.
additives.
Okay, yes, like additions, right? So things that you add. Exactly. Things that are not necessary, right? And maybe extra. Well, when we say extra, it's we're already saying that it's something that the product doesn't need to have, but that it's an optional, additional thing. Additional items, additional characteristics that make the product more attractive, right? More appealing for the consumer. So they make them easier to use, the professor says, or they make it maybe cooler. So all of those extra things, they're basically features. Now, what about the example? What's the example that the professor gives for this?
Windows, electrical windows.
Exactly.
Sunroof.
All right. What else?
Stereo.
No. Okay. So yeah, I think air conditioning is also mentioned. But basically, those are examples, right? Those are things that a car doesn't really need to have. I mean, your car doesn't need to have electric windows, but those are extra features that make them more appealing for the consumer. Now, one more thing that I'd say it's important to say that has to do with the question. So what is the role in consumer decision making? I think that this has changed, right? So what happens with that? What is the role of reliability and features in consumer decision making now and before?
Reliability now isn't a decision factor.
Exactly. But instead, features are, right? Why? Because, I mean, cars are supposed to be reliable, or not cars, right? Products are just supposed to be reliable. So it's something that should be that way. So when you buy a product, then you're not really looking at reliability too much. Right now, you're looking at features, right? Or consumers are looking at features. The most deciding, the most important factor here will be features. And it wasn't always this way, but right now it is. So is that okay? This is kind of how your notes should look like. Okay, it should be something similar to this. It doesn't have to be the same. And of course, you don't need to write down full sentences, right? The way that I'm doing maybe, or you don't need to write down like this. Things that are not keywords. You should only have keywords on your notes, things that are gonna help you remember the ideas, but not the ideas themselves. Okay? So any questions before we move on about the lecture or the way that we took our notes? Anything at all? Okay. So remember, let's take a look at the questions again. So it says, using points and examples, explain the two major factors of product quality and how their role in consumer decision-making has changed. So it's important to always read the question. Sometimes we already know what the question is going to be or going to look like, and we skip it, right? We don't focus too much on reading it. We start preparing before even reading the question. But it is important that you guys read and use what you have in the question, right, for your introduction later. So, do you really not have any questions? Okay, guys. So here's what you're actually gonna do when you're speaking. Remember, do you remember how many seconds you had to speak? Or how many minutes?
1 minute.
Exactly. So you only have 1 minute to speak. And you need to explain what you heard in the lecture. So here's what you guys are gonna do. First thing, you need to have an introduction. So this is gonna be the introduction, the first sentence. Your introduction should be as quick, as short, as concise, and as clear and direct as it can be. So this is why I told you not to take notes from the introduction when you're listening, but instead just use what you have in the question. I'm literally telling you to copy and paste. So you're gonna read what you have in the question and tell me. The lecture discusses the two major factors of product quality and their role in consumer decision making. I'm using the exact same words as we had in the question, but that's fine because this is going to be a tiny portion of your response. So it's okay if you copy and paste or you read what you have in the question. Please, the important thing about the introduction is that you are saying what the topic is, but you're doing it fast, all right? So it has to be quick. It cannot be longer than 10 seconds. That's the maximum time you can spend there. So your clock starts at 60. By the time that it's 50, then you should already be starting with the body of your response, okay? Any questions so far about that introduction? All right. So you have 50 seconds to explain the two topics in the two examples. So, I mean, the ideal way would be to organize them 25-25. So you spend 25 seconds in the first subtopic with its example and the other 25 in the second one, right? The only things that I'm gonna say, first one, make sure that when you're speaking, you are using these transition words. They don't necessarily have to be these ones, right? So if you don't like the word first, you can replace it and change it for, I don't know, to start, first of all, to begin with. It doesn't really matter what transition word you use, as long as you're using it correctly. So you're not saying, in fact, to start something, you're saying something that's used for that purpose. And as long as you're actually using one, then it's okay. So you're more than welcome to change the words as long as you keep the structure and as long as you use transitions and they are correctly used, you'll be fine. So, you know, it's, if you want, you can change them. If like maybe you're struggling in pronouncing one specific word, you're welcome to change it. But if not, then I recommend you just leave it like it is because it's the easiest and fastest. So that's one thing. Second, you're gonna notice how we are using these. These are called reporting verbs. So we're saying the professor says, the professor explains, the lecturer discusses, the lecturer states, the professor describes, the professor defines. You need to use those reporting verbs because you need to make sure that you're giving credit to the professor. Remember that these aren't your ideas, right? You know nothing about this. This is you summarizing what somebody else said. So you need to make sure that you acknowledge this isn't something that's coming from you. Okay, so you're gonna use those verbs. And basically, I mean, during the 21st, during the 25 first seconds, then you're just gonna explain the first topic. So you explain reliability here, you explain what it is, its definition, and you give the example of cars, right? And you do the same for the second one. You explain features, you tell me what those are, and you give the example of electric windows and so forth. Is this okay? I mean, I am just asking you to look at the format of the response, the template and the structure. Is that clear? Nice. So I'm gonna give you a sample response. I'm gonna do it so that you can see how I manage my time mostly and how I use the template, right? It doesn't have to be exactly the same. As long as I'm keeping the structure, using good transitions, it'll be okay. So let me show you, let me do the timer. So we have 1 minute. I have 1 minute. The lecture discusses the two major factors of product quality and their role in consumer decision making. First, the professor explains reliability, which is the absence of defects or problems that the consumer wasn't expecting when buying the product. For instance, the professor talks about cars. A car is said to be reliable when it works the way that you would expect it to work, when you don't have to constantly take it to be repaired, and it basically does its job. Then the professor goes on to explain features, which is the second major factor. And features are basically all those extra characteristics, extra things that a product has that are not necessary but make them easier to use or more appealing for the consumer. To illustrate, the professor gives the example of electric windows in a car, or sunroof, stereos, air conditioning, all those extra features that manufacturers are competing to add in their products. Right, so that was it. I didn't exactly keep the times. I maybe rushed a little bit more in the beginning, and I had 30 seconds for the second topic, not 25. And that's because I wanted to actually talk about the role in consumer decision making. I don't know if you guys noticed, but I didn't exactly mention so reliability is no longer the deciding factor, but features are. I was missing that piece of information. And I wanted to include it at the end, which is why I was leaving some space. But at the end of the day, I didn't have time. But the important thing is that, remember, this is speaking. So the important thing is that you speak calmly, that you intonate well. So maybe you're going to emphasize certain words, you're going to raise your voice in certain parts. You're going to try to articulate the sentences as clearly as you can. I mean, you're going to be careful with the grammar, with maybe the verbs. Usually students get maybe stuck when conjugating the verbs, so you're going to be careful there. And the content goes, I mean, it's not the most important part, right? But still, you should try to be as accurate, as precise as you can. And that's it, and if you run out of time, you try to hide it. If there's something that you wanted to say, didn't make it on time, then you do your best to hide that, because it has to look like a structured response. So is that okay? Do you guys have any questions now that you've heard my response? Any questions? Any comments? Suggestions? So that's it. Now, before we practice, because remember that tomorrow is a practice session, so tomorrow you guys will be doing what I just did. You will be working with different questions. But before we practice today too, I wanted to talk about the topics that you can find here. So by the way, these are the same that you will get for task number 3 in the speaking section. But I wanted to say the major topics, the major subjects that you will hear about in the lectures are psychology, biology, and business. All right, there's 90% chances that you'll get one of those: psychology, biology, or business. When we have psychology, it's usually about our brain, about our mind. So how we interact with each other, our memory, our learning, our experiences. So everything that's related to that. Biology is always 100% of the time for this question, animals and plants. So they talk about their evolution, their adaptations to the environment, to catch prey, to survive, to get food, those types of things. Business, usually marketing techniques and advertisement, but sometimes you get something related to economics as well. So maybe maybe the types of goods, types of services, product demand, product, those types of supply and demand. So sometimes you get something related to economics as well. And obviously nothing is 100%, precise. So there is the chance that you can get something different than those. So perhaps you get art, you get history, sociology, but it is really rare that you get something different. So I don't think you'll get something that's not psychology, biology, or business, but either way, it's important to say. Now, why am I saying this? How is this important? How is this relevant? The thing is, these are academic topics, right? So these are something that maybe you guys aren't experts in biology. Maybe your vocabulary isn't great for biology topics, right? Maybe you never use biology vocabulary in your life. That's my case, for example. So honestly, I don't know the names of all the animals and all the plants and all the chemicals, and I don't have maybe the necessary vocabulary related to biology topics, but you can improve and you can work on that, right? Or maybe your understanding is also blurred when there are certain words that you don't understand. So the reason why I'm telling you this is so that you can practice reading and listening about these topics. So for psychology, for example, you can go online and maybe watch some TED Talks, see some I don't know, watch some interesting videos about psychology, or read, because that's also going to help you for the other tests. So read and basically consume content that's related to these topics. Same thing for biology. So to study vocabulary, the best way is to do it by like using context. So you can go to, I don't know, to YouTube and maybe look for National Geographic videos. You have these short videos that are really similar to what you have in here. So that's going to help you expand your vocabulary. You can listen to podcasts for business. So try to, what I'm saying is try to expand your vocabulary in this topic so that you're not lost when you get one of these. Okay? Is that okay? Do you guys have any questions about this? Okay, guys. So really no questions before we start practicing, because some of you guys are gonna do it. All right. So let's start with this one here. All right. So although we have already done business, let's do psychology. I'm gonna play the lecture. Please make sure that you take notes.
Now listen to part of a lecture in a psychology class.
When people are in difficult situations, sometimes they experience feelings of helplessness or psychological pain. So what do? They unconsciously use strategies called defense mechanisms to protect themselves psychologically from their painful emotions. Let's say a woman has a pet dog. She's had this dog for a long time, and he's kept her company and guarded her for years, but one day he runs away. This woman looks everywhere and asks other people if they've seen her dog, but she just can't find him. Now, she feels helpless and sad because she misses her dog, so she'll unconsciously find ways to deal with her painful feelings. One defense mechanism she might use is fantasy. With fantasy, the woman uses her imagination. So, instead of just feeling helpless and sad about her lost dog, she invents a happy story in her mind. She might imagine that a nice family found him and feeds him, and that he's really happy with them. She'll picture the dog playing, running around, having fun. Because of this fantasy, she doesn't have to feel sad about her dog running away. It's a fantasy. It's not real, but it keeps her pain away. Another defense mechanism she might use is what we call sublimation. Sublimation is different from fantasy because sublimation isn't about pretending. It's about turning negative emotions into something useful, practical. So the woman might start a dog training school. That way, by training dogs, perhaps she can help prevent other people's dogs from running away like hers did. In other words, with sublimation as a defense mechanism, the woman redirects her negative feelings about losing her dog into a positive, constructive activity.
Okay. So the question says, using points and examples from the talk, describe the two defense mechanisms mentioned by the professor. Right? Now you will have 20 seconds to prepare your responses, and somebody will try. Please, you may start preparing your responses. Okay. So, is there anyone who would like to try? Okay, just give it a try, give it a shot. It's gonna be your first time, so don't worry if it's not perfect. It doesn't have to be. Just a way, it's just, I mean, a place where we're gonna start, right? So would anybody do it? Whatever you want, or do you think you can try?
First,
Okay,
uh,
great, thanks. Please go ahead.
okay. The lecture discussed about the difficult situation, about the psychological pain, and how the people can act about bad situations. And they use a mechanism of defense. For example, the people can use the fantasy is one of mechanisms of defense to avoid the pain. Or, for example, if if someone has a pet and the pet dies, she can imagine good situations with the pet. Another kind of it can be the sublimation, and it's about how you redirect the negative feelings.
Okay, Walter, great, well done. So I like the fact that you were able to understand the ideas. You got the two main ideas in the examples I can see. So you got the first one, fantasy, and sublimation as the second one, right? And you know what those are about, and you were able to also explain the example. So in terms of content, it's good. Now, some tips I can give you. Now, the first one is going to be you ran out of time, right? You didn't have enough time to explain the second one. So what you can do is save time in the introduction. Your introduction was more than 20 seconds long, where it should have been only 10. So you don't need to explain what defense mechanisms are. You just use what you have in the question, what you have after the word explain. And it said, explain, describe, well, in this case, it wasn't explain, describe the two defense mechanisms mentioned by the professor. So in your introduction, you should just have the lecture discusses two defense mechanisms. And you go directly to the first. First, the professor explains fantasy, which is imagining a happy situation to deal with the pain. For instance, the professor gives the example of a woman who has lost her dog. She might imagine that a nice family has found the dog and the dog is happy, right? Then she goes on. So go faster to the first subtopic. You don't need to explain too much. The topic is enough if you just give that introduction using the question. Okay, so that would be my tip. Make sure that you save time in there. And nothing else. I think that's the main thing. Okay. All right, Walter, great. Do you guys have any questions? Do you want to do one more? We did business, we did psychology.
I have a question. The listening is like that. Not more fast, not faster.
Exactly like that. I mean, obviously, it's not always going to be the same, but it tends to be around that speed.
Okay.
And another question, is the same accent, or because I took some tests, they reproduce some audios with like a French accent or German accent. It's like other accents in English.
Okay, good question, actually. So where did you take these tests? Were they official from the ETS?
No, nothing official.
So actually, I mean, they won't always have the same accent, but it's usually the standard American accent that you hear. So I have, from all of the questions that I've seen, like all of the practices that I did, and these are, by the way, these are official from the ETS, extracted from past TOEFL tests. And when I took the test myself, it's always the same accent. So you'll never hear, I didn't even hear like a British or Australian accent or anything like that. Usually it's just the standard American accent. And out of the many questions that I did, all of them were the same accent. So I don't think you'll have anything different than this.
Thanks.
Yes. Any other question? So let's hear this one here. It's biology now. And let's see how it goes.
Listen to part of a lecture in a marine biology class.
A lot of plants and animals live near the surface of the ocean, and that means there's a lot of food near the surface because there are lots of plants and animals to eat. But if you go down to the deepest parts of the ocean, it's cold and dark, and there's not a lot living down there, so food is very scarce. So organisms that live down at these great depths have developed special adaptations to help them survive in this environment where food is so hard to find. For example, many deep-sea organisms have body features that enable them to eat prey that are larger than themselves. A good example, there's a species of eel that has an enormous mouth and a large stomach that's capable of expanding. And these unusual features allow this eel to eat prey larger than itself. That's a big advantage, because if the eel eats something big, that's a lot of food, a lot of nutrition. So the eel can go for quite a while before it has to find food again. Another helpful adaptation in some deep-sea organisms is the ability to generate light. And some organisms use that light to help them capture food. For example, there's a kind of fish called the anglerfish, and on its head, this fish has a little structure that produces light, that glows in the dark. This little structure, this little light, is positioned close to the fish's mouth. Other fish are attracted to this light. They think it's something small they can eat, so they swim straight toward it, and that brings them close enough for the anglerfish to capture them and eat them.
Okay, guys. Now pay attention to the question. It says, using the examples of the eel and anglerfish, explain two types of adaptations that help animals survive in the deepest parts of the ocean. You'll now have 20 seconds to prepare your responses. Guys, so who would like to try this time?
Me.
Okay, great. So please, you may go ahead.
The lecture discusses about two types of adaptation that help animals survive in the deepest parts of the ocean. First, the professor explains the body features, like some fishes have, for example, large stomach that makes to eat more food because the stomach can expand it. Also, then she explained about general light that attracts other fishes to his lights and can eat them like anglerfish. That's all. What happened if I don't complete the time?
Nothing happens as long as your response was already complete, right? If you said everything that you needed to say, you mentioned both topics, both examples, and it's fine. But if you had some extra time, like 10 seconds, that's okay. You could go with a short conclusion and say something like, these are the two adaptations that have help animals survive in the ocean. Right? So you repeat what you said in the interview. Or these are the two adaptations that the professor mentions help animals survive. Something like that.
Okay.
Okay, but that was a great response. Congratulations, Alejandra. Really, really well done. So I loved your introduction. You used what you had in the question. You were short and concise. One thing, and I think I've heard it like I think I've heard it before. Walter also said this. In the beginning, when you say the lecture discusses, after the verb discuss, you don't really need the preposition about. So it's like, it's interesting, but it's different than in Spanish. So go directly to what it discusses. The lecture discusses the two types of adaptations that help animals survive. Okay?
Okay.
That, and I love the way that you were able to identify both subtopics, because in this case, you didn't have names, right? It wasn't like a concept as we saw before, like fantasy or reliability. But instead, it was just an explanation. So some animals have body features, that's the first topic, and other animals have the ability to generate light, second topic. So you caught both of them. You forgot to mention the first example. So about the eel, right? It's okay, but remember that you have it in the question. So you already know that the example is the eel, and you already know what it's about having like a larger stomach. So use the question, right? Even if you don't remember exactly what it was about, tell me. The professor gives the example of the eel, which is an animal that has this large stomach and a large mouth to store more food, even if it's not mentioned. And one more thing, and this goes for everyone, when you have biology, you will always have something exactly like this. You have the topic, you have two subtopics, which are never going to be concepts, and you have two examples, which are two animals or plants. Now, the tip is, since you're going to be dealing with animals and plants in your examples, you have to be careful with the pronouns that you're going to use. So I know that usually, like when we speak, it's normal to use he or she for animals. Like it isn't grammatically correct, but it's normal, right? Like especially when we refer to pets, pet animals. But in this case, try to use the pronoun it, or if not, the easiest thing you can use is make it plural and use they or them, so that you don't get confused between it or he or she. Right? Is that okay, you guys? Do you have any questions? Okay, so thank you so much to those of you who participated today. Tomorrow, everyone's gonna go and everyone's gonna give it a try. And we'll try different types of questions. We did biology, psychology, and business today, and we'll do other ones too tomorrow. So if you really don't have any questions, please don't forget the daily survey before you go. And I will be seeing you guys tomorrow.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye guys, take care.
Thank you.